I love the old-fashioned.
And yes, I am old-fashioned, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are too. That's why we love going back in time and looking back at these old Oscar races. It is time for the biggest show that we do all year, our 1942 in review. We're going to look back at the Oscar races of 1942. It is March 1st, 2018. 75 years and 3 days from the day that they awarded the Academy Awards for the 1942 year. Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm so excited you're joining us here. I'm here. I got my Yankees hat on for y'all because the Yankees were in the 1942 World Series, as I'll talk about later. They didn't win it. I'll get to that, but I don't have a Cardinals hat. And those of you that watched the show and watched our 1966 show last year when we went back 50 years, you might remember that I was so rushed, trying to watch all the movies in times and prepare for the big show that I've been waiting for all year, that I wore myself down and got sick. And here we are again. You might tell in my voice, ladies and gentlemen, I am once again sick for the biggest show that I do all year. Luckily, the Oscar preview and the top 10 that we did the last couple nights, I was not sick, but this morning it came on and I'm sniffly. So I apologize in advance. Hopefully I won't get too hoarse. So yeah, this is our third show in a series of a finale, ending our third season. We started on Tuesday with our top 10 of 2017. Then we did an Oscar preview for this year's Oscars. That was last night. And here we are looking back at the year 1942. And I've got some good friends with me to look back at that. We announced it before. You probably are aware of them at this point. First, he may not be with the Yankees, but he's the pride of the No Name Cinema Society. Ladies and gentlemen, George Roberts is with us. Welcome, George. Are you excited?
Yes, I really am. Looking forward to talking about all these movies.
And, of course, my own personal Yankee Doodle dandy, our Jeopardy champion, Jim Carroll. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I would do a little shuffle for you, but yeah, I don't want to love.
I appreciate that. Those of you who are new to the show, just as a reminder, we start sort of setting the stage of the year, so you get a sense of what was going on in the world, in the industry, to sort of paint the picture and give some context for when we start talking about the movie. So quickly-ish, we're gonna talk about the year in general, and so 1942 was an interesting year in music because the number one song of the year was not just the number one song of the year. It's actually the number one song of all time. And it is from a film. Strangely, it was released in June. And I've got two trivia experts here. I wonder if they can guess. They probably already know what is the biggest song of 1942 and the biggest song of all time.
Well, it also won the Oscar, I believe.
It did indeed.
Yeah. White Christmas.
White Christmas, released in June for some reason of 1942.
That I did not know.
Yeah, from the movie Holiday Inn, so win the Oscar. Interestingly enough, Irving Berlin presented the Oscar for Best Song, so he presented this Oscar to himself because he wrote White Christmas. More fun trivia for you. What was interesting to me musically is the pop stars of the day, from what I could gather, were basically middle-aged men and nerds. So, Jim, you would have fit in quite well.
Thank you. If you'd ever heard me sing, you would.
Well, that's the point. I'm not talking about the singers. I'm talking about the band leaders were the biggest stars of the year. People like Glenn Miller and Kay Kaiser and Tommy Dorsey. It's almost like the EDM artists of today. These DJs, because the vocalists of these songs are almost secondary. The other weird thing about the music from 1942 is they all seem to be recording the same songs. I think there were 3 versions of White Cliffs of Dover on the top 50 of 1942.
That's actually something that I find interesting, is how much repetition of the same songs that you see, especially in that period of time. It's like each band had to have their version in that repertoire.
But I'm surprised people would buy all the different records enough that 3 of the versions would be top, because they don't sound that different to me. You know what I mean? What's the difference between Harry James' version and Glenn Miller's version?
They probably don't sound that different to you because that's not the vernacular of music that you're listening to.
I know they won't have much to say about the next section. This is something Davey always used to get behind, but and it's a good time to start drinking beer because it's the sports section.
Hey.
Well, I did know that the Yankees played in the World Series and didn't win in the World Series.
Okay, well, good. There you go. And I did a vlog on that, but I'm going to go in seasonal order. And that, of course, starts with the earliest championship is the NCAA tournament. And 1942 was the fourth NCAA tournament they ever had. There was only 8 teams in the tournament as opposed to the 68 that they have now. And Stanford, the Stanford Cardinal, came out on top, defeating Dartmouth. It is the only title Stanford would ever win. In hockey, 1942, the Toronto Maple Leafs would be the champion. They would win the final in 7 games. It was the first Stanley Cup final to go 7 games. They would actually come back from down 3 games to none to win the best of 7. It's the first 5 times that's happened in any sport ever. So it was the first time that ever happened. In game 4, actually, the Leafs were down to the Red Wings 2-0 before coming back to win. So they were actually a period and a half of away from being eliminated in a sweep. They tied the score up in the second period of game 4 and came all the way back. At the end of game 4, interestingly enough, that ended in a riot with the Detroit coach punching a referee, and that sort of turned the tide of the series. I knew I could get these guys interested in the sports section. There was no NBA in 1942. That didn't come around until 1947. I did a vlog on the baseball, the World Series. The Cardinals would win the World Series. I think it's vlog number 57. The Yankees would win the first game, but St. Louis won all 4 after that and winning in 5 games. The Yankees, however, would get revenge in 1943, beating the Cardinals in 5 games. NCAA football is a sticky wicket until they invented the BCS, because they had the sports writers name a champion, which makes things really confusing because officially there are 3 different champions, technically speaking: Georgia, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. Georgia at 11-1 had the most groups name them champions. So I'm sort of officially calling Georgia the champion. I'm deciding. They also won the Rose Bowl over UCLA 9-0. So I declared the Georgia Bulldogs the champion of 1942. There was no Super Bowl, but there was the NFL championship, and the team from Washington would win the championship that year. Their opponent was the Chicago Bears, who entered the game undefeated. Washington would win the game 14-6, and it's notable championship because it had 2 all-time great quarterbacks, Slingin' Sammy Baugh for Washington versus Sid Luckman for Chicago, and that was the championship that year. So that was kind of cool. See, sports is done.
Hey,
Like painless.
hey, it's good to know.
This brings us to the news section, world events. And quite frankly, 3 letters kind of sums up everything when it comes to 1942. And George, you're already nodding.
War.
The U.S. was in the war less than a month when 1942 began. In all my research, I was fascinated by this concept that was preceding 1942 of isolationism versus internationalism. And I thought it was interesting because we struggle with those same issues today. And I thought it was interesting that it was, the Hollywood liberals were among those that were anti-isolationists and were more war mongers, if you will. Mongers is maybe a wrong word, but they were more pro-war. And generally speaking, in our day and age, you don't think of liberals as being pro-war.
No. It's fascinating how that flipped.
Yeah.
This has fascinated me for years.
You look back, some of the documentaries we watched for the show, shows you like some polls that they did before the Pearl Harbor was bombed of middle American people. And they're like, and they'd just been through World War I, so I get it. And they're like, no, it's Europe's problem, not our problem. Let it be. It was really interesting to see the dichotomy there. And knowing how dangerous Hitler was in hindsight, I struggle to understand that concept. I'm trying to.
Politically, there was a little bit better knowledge of the danger coming, and it was trying to figure out how to sell that to as you say, middle America, to the Americans in large.
But once Pearl Harbor happened, the bait was pretty much over. In 1942, most of the effort actually was focused on the Pacific, partly because the U.S. wasn't ready, and partly supposedly by design between General Marshall and Winston Churchill. They had a plan to sort of escalate Europe in 1943, according to Ken Burns' documentary. Things were not going well for most of 1942 until the Battle of Midway in June was the first real victory for the U.S. and the Allies, I should say, in the Pacific. That started to turn the tide a little bit. And I'm fascinated by some of the things that went on in Guadalcanal, which was recaptured by the Allies in November of 1942. And that was a lot of back and forth. A lot of stuff seemed to go down in 1942. I recommend the Ken Burns documentary on World War II. That was very useful. All right. That's a lot of the news. Now we're going to segue to the film industry. We're going to see we're getting closer to the Oscar debates. In my research, I counted 150 total films that I could find that were released that were eligible, I should say, for the Oscars in 1942. I managed to watch 65. George and Jim, George, you first, because you're closer to my number. What's your number?
I think it was 56.
Good Lord. I think I got 23, 24.
23, 24. It'll
To
be,
be fair, I do have 3 children.
I know your eldest would love some of these movies.
She actually sat down and watched. She was watching Sullivan's Travels with me. She watched a good deal of To Be or Not to Be.
The next question that I always ask, both in this and the top 10, is what's the one film that you missed that you most wish you could have had time to watch? George, I know for you and I both, there's no access to films like The Pied Piper or The War Against Mrs. Hadley. We couldn't find copies of them.
I tried. I really tried. No, you're right. Pied Piper is the one that sticks out to me. There's one other, though, because I did see it a very, very long time ago, and I tried to get a copy of Across the Pacific and did not. So I've seen the movie, but it's so long ago I don't count it.
I did get a copy of it. I did watch that one. Maybe Netflix discontinued it.
I wanted to see Reap the Wild Wind. I kept putting it off, and I never got a chance to see it. That was one of the ones that was on my list. I didn't get around to it.
Cecil B. DeMille, okay.
Mainly for the giant squid battle.
Oh, there you go, yeah. The ones I missed, I mean, the one that I've seen before, but I wanted to rewatch because I remember liking it. I wasn't sure how much it was going to play into the awards. That was technically a 1941 film that was eligible for 1942 Oscars, was The Man Who Came to Dinner. I've seen it several times in the past, but it's been a while, and I wanted to rewatch it. Netflix was due to come, and then all of a sudden it popped up saying, long wait. It didn't show up in time. The other one is, there's a film called To the Shores of Tripoli that arrived, but the disc came cracked. And so I didn't get to see that. And the other one is Eagle Squadron, I kind of wanted to see. That's the only film on the top 20 box office hits that I did not get to see, is Eagle Squadron. Speaking of box office, that's the next topic, is the biggest box office hits of the year. Of course, the Best Picture winner was the biggest box office hit of the year. Mrs. Miniver broke a lot of box office records, had a 10 or 11 week run, very, very popular film. Yankee Doodle Dandy was the second most popular film of the year at the box office. And one that I hadn't really known a lot about before this project, Random Harvest, was the third biggest box office film of the year. George, you probably knew this.
I did not. I never pay attention. I go to the movies all the time, and I never care about the box office. If I produced a movie, I would care.
I normally don't care either, but looking at it historically,
I'm loving learning about this. I had no idea Random Harvest in particular was that popular. I saw that for the first time in preparation for this.
Me too. So that brings me to some industry events that I wanted to talk about. So we talked about world events, but I wanted to also mention some things that were going on within the film industry that I thought were notable. And the first one's kind of sad. On January 16th of 1942, we had the sort of what would be the first casualty of the war, certainly as far as Hollywood is concerned. Carol Lombard was one of the first Hollywood people to get involved with selling war bonds. On her way home from a tour to get people to buy war bonds, her plane crashed just outside of Las Vegas. All 22 people on board perished. Mrs. Clark Gable was 33 at the time. She had one film released in 1942, at least one George and I watched, and it sounded like Jim watched it too with his daughter, To Be or Not to Be. George and I went together to see it at Film Forum. We appreciated the greatness that was Carol Lombard.
Oh, yes.
The other thing that I thought was interesting, and bear with me for this, Errol Flynn in 1942. On October 28th, he was accused of statutory rape by 2 separate teenage girls. As the trial would unfold, the defense attorney argued that though the girls claimed not to know each other and the alleged incident happened months apart, they filed their complaints within days of each other, suggesting collusion with the state. He also attacked the girls' morals and found evidence of their loose behavior. Flynn was acquitted. And I thought it was worth mentioning because in 1942, it seemed to have zero impact on his career. I saw at least 2 films he had released this year. I think in the age of Me Too movement, if this came today, the accusation alone would have derailed his career. A sharp contrast to how 1942 went out. My favorite part of this story is the organization that rallied to Flynn's defense, ABCDEF. The American Boys Club for the Defense of Errol Flynn. All kidding aside, I was fascinated by the story, how it unfolded. It's a prime example of how women are not being believed. And to the defense attorney's credit, if I were the defense attorney, I'd wonder about that timetable as well. But it's interesting how quickly the jury was to dismiss the claims.
Yep.
Did anybody know about that, or is that more knowledge I'm dropping on y'all?
I knew that he had those accusations against him. I did not realize it happened this year. And I know that that and maybe even more led to the very famous term, in like Flynn.
See, now George has some knowledge. I don't know if I knew that, but that's pretty funny. So now I want to talk to you guys, and I think I told you this was coming up, about film trends. Before we get to the actual awards, like we watched, between us, 60 plus It sounds like, George said he watched 12 that I didn't. So at least 77 different films we watched. And there's a lot of things that I noticed I thought worth mentioning just over the course of the whole series of films. I mean, of course, the biggest thing to make its way into the films of 1942 was the war itself. There's the films that dealt with the war. Some dealt with the war directly, which is fine, but others strangely injected the war into their pre-existing films. There is a handful of films, like a dozen that I saw, that felt like they were scripts sitting around on somebody's desk, and then somebody said, we need to squeeze the war into here. Films like Somewhere I'll Find You and Once Upon a Honeymoon. You wouldn't think they're war films, but they totally are.
Pittsburgh has a third that ties the war in. And I even thought For Me and My Gal did that.
For Me and My Gal was World War I, at least.
No, but the end suddenly became about it. It trivialized his whole desire to play the palace. The whole thing became
absolutely. Then there's like things like Youth on Parade, which had nothing to do with the war, but then all of a sudden, maybe 3/4 of the way through, somebody has a speech looking directly at the camera, telling us how important it is for us to fight and all this other stuff. So the war weaved its way into films in very strange ways. It was interesting, certainly historically. I think that in some of the films suffered creatively for it. But it was interesting.
If you were going to ask me what the one theme over that the course of the year was, propaganda, I think, is the word. Yeah. It's not just war films. It is nationalistic. It is trying to denigrate the opposing forces as much as possible. All the Japanese wear glasses. They have buck teeth.
The Japanese were handled much more racism than the Germans.
Even in Der Fuhrer's face, the first shot, they introduced the Nazi generals as effeminate, and they have Hirohito as a horrible yellow-faced caricature. There's that sense of, we are the good guys, and not only are they bad, but they are morally depraved. They are different than us. You get that so much through a lot of the things.
Yeah, I agree. That's a big part of it. And I think overall, one of the things I noticed, and this was my next topic, and I wasn't going to dwell on it because it was almost obvious, the constant racism and misogyny throughout a lot of these films that I guess you would expect, from the time period. I mean, there is occasional kind of nice treatment of African Americans. Sullivan's Travels has one scene that's really uncomfortable, and then a scene at the end that is a very nice treatment of African Americans. And one of the more interesting nice is the best word, fair maybe treatment of African Americans comes from In This Our Life, melodrama, which has some of the better African American characters.
I'm so glad to hear you bring that up, and also particularly to bring up how In This Our Life has a very different scenario to present. It's obviously not a trend, but it was a facet of the movies I noticed as well. How can you not? But one thing that I also noticed, because there were certain states where they didn't want to show African Americans in movies at all, they would tack on these little, like Louise Beavers singing that song in Holiday Inn, which was awful to begin with. But they could cut her clip right out of it to show it in certain states. Mm-hmm. Orchestra Wives ends with the Nicholas brothers doing a great dance. They could cut it right out. Yeah. Tales of Manhattan has a finale with Paul Robeson and Ethel Waters. They didn't have to show it in certain states.
That was already sort of chaptery anyway. Tales of Manhattan.
Yes, that's true.
But and Sullivan's Travels, they cut out the beginning of the church sequence with the preacher. They cut straight to the movie. When the prisoners are already in.
I never even knew that, but it makes perfect sense. Yes.
Yeah. In addition to being racist and misogynist, I also felt like a lot of the heroes, a lot of our protagonists in a lot of these movies are douchebags. And I felt like that was a common theme that I noticed in a lot of these movies. I felt frustrated that I hated a lot of these characters. You already talked about Holiday Inn. Fred Astaire in Holiday Inn is a jerk, like a huge jerk. Clark Gable in Somewhere I'll Find You. Gene Kelly in For Me and My Gal. Jimmy Cagney in Captain of the Clouds. Victor Mature in My Gal Sal. John Wayne in Pittsburgh. Spencer Tracy in Tortilla Flat. And both Bob Hope and Bing Crosby in Road to Morocco. They were really unlikable. And
the other one from Pittsburgh, Randolph Scott in The Spoilers is that same thing. Well, actually, to some extent, they both are.
Well, in The Spoilers, I felt I rooted for John Wayne in The Spoilers. And for The Spoilers, I felt like Randolph Scott was the heavy. He was the bad guy. In Pittsburgh, I felt like John Wayne was supposed to be the protagonist, but he was a jerk.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Jim, you seem to get pumped when I said that, so you've got something.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, even movies where they set you up with the character is a jerk, like Magnificent Ambersons. I was not prepared for the level of jerkiness, but wow. I mean, Tortilla Flats definitely. I was surprised at how unlikable a lot of these people were.
And it just makes me wonder, is this sort of behavior being celebrated, or, like I wasn't sure. And it sort of makes me appreciate Robert Taylor and Johnny Eager a little more, because he was a jerk, but, like at least there was some pushing on his moral code, you know what I mean? Like they were challenging a little bit. That's fine. Like I don't mind an antagonist that's a jerk and then has an arc. These other guys were just like plain out jerks, Gene Kelly's arc, and For Me and My Gal, I just didn't buy. So the other thing that I thought was interesting in terms of the way I reacted to the films, what I said on the top 10 is there were a very small handful of 2017 movies that I loved, and a bunch that I thought were good but didn't love. There were a lot of good movies, but very few that I actually really loved, and I feel like there's usually at least 9 or 10 that I really enjoy. For 1942, I loved so many, but hated so many. So and very few fell in between. Like there were very few movies that I was just okay with. I'd say there's like 14 or 15 movies that I love, maybe even 16 that I really, really loved. And a bunch of them that were just bad. And if there were some in the middle, they were because they were interesting historically, but maybe we'll get to that later. But the other thing, and I said the same thing about the 2017 films, and I'm not normally one that enjoys comedies, and maybe it's my age or my political climate, or the current political climate. But for some reason, movies both from 2017 and 1942, the movies that were fun and light were generally much more appealing to me. There was a priority on the fun, the joy that these films were bringing. So, and that might come out as over the course of the evening. I think you'll see, some of my choices are steering in that direction. The other thing that I thought was interesting from an industry point of view, is for the most part, I mean, I watched 65 of these, and it generally seems to be the same 50 people making all of these movies. I mean,
oh my God, I noticed that so many times.
Yeah, from a director's point of view, I saw 2 by John Huston. You didn't see Across the Pacific, but I did, and I saw
done it. Yeah, George Stevens.
George Stevens had 2. Raoul Walsh had 2. Mervyn LeRoy had 2. Preston Sturges technically had 2. Bubsy Berkeley had 2. And actors, for God's sakes, John Wayne. Powell had 2, absolutely. John Wayne had 5 films. I think Ginger Rogers had 5 if you count Tales of Manhattan. Ray Milland had, I think, 4. Betty Davis, 3 or 4. Veronica Lake, I counted 2. Robert Cummings, I counted 3. And it's the same people that are recycling. That's part of the studio system, but I just thought it was really interesting watching these movies en masse. Jim, you only watched 23 or so. Did you notice this, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, Teresa Wright, Pride of the Yankees, and Mrs. Miniver. I mean, she's in 2 of the Best Picture nominated films. And
she was nominated for both, and we'll get to that momentarily. She's obviously going to be a big person that comes up tonight. So the other thing that I wanted to at least do is do a little comparison, not comparison, but because we did this last year on our 1966 show, because 2 years ago we did 1990, and I sort of did the crossover between 1960 and 1990. So I thought it'd be interesting to sort of highlight for our fans the crossover between 1942 and 1966, because there's not that many. From a director's point of view, obviously John Huston, we already mentioned, he did In This Our Life and Across the Pacific. But in 1966, he not only directed, but had played the role of Noah in the biggest box office hit of 1966. He was in the Bible in 1966 and directed it. And of course, the other one that stands out is Billy Wilder, who made his directorial debut in 1942 with The Major and the Minor, and in 1966 directed Walter Matthau to an Academy Award for The Fortune Cookie. From an actor's point of view, Lana Turner, who was in Somewhere I'll Find You, and Johnny Eager in 1942. And in 1966, she did a film called Madam X, which actually, I tend to like some of those Ross Hunter melodramas. Kind of was intrigued by that one. Arthur Kennedy is another one that showed up, who has a connection with Lana Turner via Peyton Place. He was in Desperate Journey, directed by Raoul Walsh. And in 1966, he was in Fantastic Voyage. Ryder McDowell plays the young Tyrone Power in Son of Fury. And of course, in 1966, a movie that I told Jim a lot about in one of our sound-offs, Ryder McDowell's in Lord Love a Duck from 1966. One of my favorite ones to talk about, is I love these character actors, is a gentleman by the name of Ben Blue, who played one of Gene Kelly's friends in For Me and My Gal. And Jim, you might appreciate this. He would then go on to play the Paul Revere type character in The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, the one who actually rode around on a horse yelling the phrase, "The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming." And that's the same actor from For Me and My Gal. The biggest probably actress that we talked about in a 1966 show last year was, of course, Elizabeth Taylor for her work in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She would make her film debut in 1942 in a film that I did not see called There's One Born Every Minute. That's some of the crossover from 1942 and 1966. So now, finally, it's time to segue to the awards. It's Oscar talk. Yes. I know you guys are excited. Look at how excited Jim is. George is excited too. This is awesome. All right, my boys are pumped. So the first category we're going to try and do is Best Original Screenplay. And the screenplay categories were a little weird because they had 3 different writing categories. It was Best Original Story, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Screenplay. I'm not exactly clear on all the differences. Regardless, here are the nominees. And the winner would be Woman of the Year from Michael Kanan and Rig Lardner Jr. And I'm going to start with a should win because this is one that I think they actually got right. I would say Woman of the Year is close to a perfect screenplay. It's definitely about feminism, but for me, more about work-life balance. And I think it deals with sexuality in an honest and fearless way. I actually think they got this one right, and I don't say that very often. Woman of the Year, I do think, is the best screenplay on this list. I should tell the audience that The War Against Mrs. Hadley is unavailable to find. So that was one that none of us were able to watch. Yeah. The other thing I want to say is 2 of the 5 nominees here, I would put on my top 5 original screenplays of the year. So they got 2 of the 5 nominees right, as far as I'm concerned. Jim, what should have won?
So I agree with you here. Woman of the Year was actually one of the first films I watched way back when we got the list in June. And I remember making a note of this because I looked it up, and after watching it, I wrote, "This is great. This is great rating." And that was the thing that carried me all the way to here was that note. This is great rating. And then so yes, I absolutely agree that was the right call.
George,
no argument about that one winning. I think it's a delightful movie for all the reasons you mentioned. It gives its 2 leads and even the supporting people around them so much to play with. She really is presented as such a force, such a brilliant woman. I mean, to this day, I think any woman could watch that and, whereas they can't necessarily watch Lana Turner from back then and relate to her as a role model. Yeah, they certainly could still watch Woman of the Year.
Absolutely. Now that brings us to should have been nominated. So what original screenplay, and you had to maybe do some research to make sure it was original. Because I certainly
I did.
So what original screenplay should have been nominated that was not? George?
There are 3, and I have to cut it down to 1. But
we'll cut it down to 1 because maybe I'll have one of the other ones. You never know. So pick one.
Okay. I'm going to start with one that was already mentioned. Preston Sturges for Sullivan's Travels.
And George, that is what I have as well. Preston Sturges for Sullivan's Travels.
Great, we're in agreement.
Yeah, we're in a good. That was the one I had it as well. It's superbly crafted. The concept I feel like is better than the actual execution. I have some issues directorially, but as a screenplay, it's frequently clever with a lot to say. It's an achievement, even if some of the dialogue strains to make the point a little bit, and the plot has a handful of contrivances. And I think about the cockeyed caravan line at the end that I wince a little bit at. But with that said, so many scenes are pitch perfect that it gets the nod in this sort of hard to define category. I still think Woman of the Year is better. And a couple of my favorite films were apparently based on plays, and maybe that'll come up later. But as far as original screenplay is concerned, I'm also got Sullivan's Travels as should have been nominated. Not should have won. You guys have Woman of the Year there, but Sullivan's Travels should have been nominated.
Exactly what you say is right. It works on so many levels. I mean, it is about the movies. And as witty and wonderful as Preston Sturges' dialogue often is, the silences in Sullivan's Travel have as much to do with how well it works as the very witty dialogue that is often there. I never had a problem with it, actually. If you did, that's fine.
Thanks, George.
No.
Jim, what do you think should have been nominated? Original screenplay.
Sullivan's Travels. We're still on the same.
Yeah. You didn't pick one though.
No. That was my agreement.
Oh, you were also picking Sullivan's Travels. It's a clean sweep.
That was the film that I had. So okay. I'm glad to see we are all in agreement on this.
Do you want to add anything we have to say about it, or did we cover it?
No, I thought we pretty much covered this.
All right, moving on to the acting categories, ladies and gentlemen. Best Supporting Actor. On my list of 5 supporting actors, I have 2 of these 5, and the winner would be Van Heflin for a prototypical supporting performance, almost as if it was crafted for this Oscar category. And I'm going to go first again because I also think, based on the nominees, they got this one right. He's not my number one choice of the year. It's an extremely well-written character, executed to perfection. His world weariness and the conflict about his devotion to Johnny are writ large across his face. Great choices and, quite frankly, a character and performance 10 years ahead of its time, along with a couple of other performances that should have been in this category. So, guys, I actually have Van Heflin as should have winning. George, I'm going to ask you to go first. Who should have won?
Van Heflin, absolutely. I was stunned by how good he was in the film. It's a character you certainly didn't see in that time period. And you said 10 years ahead of its time, maybe 25. I mean, he's in love with Johnny Eager, and it's never done in limp-wristed fashion. He's truly in love with him.
Yeah.
And Johnny knows it. And while he doesn't love him back,
but Johnny relies on it. Johnny uses it.
He does love him, not the same way. But
yeah, no, for sure. No, he relies on him a great deal. So yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I have a couple other performances I like better that I'll at least mention one of them.
I'm saying of these.
Yeah, no, for sure. And
I'm glad he won.
It's weird how much we're agreeing with the Academy. Like, it's going to stop soon, I think, at least for me. Jim, what do you think?
I did not see the Van Heflin performance.
Ooh.
I know. I guess I'll have to get on this.
Good movie.
Oh, and in fairness, I had to buy the film. It is not generally available. I had to purchase it on Amazon, and I lent it to George. I
had to borrow it from JB.
Yeah.
So, now I see how it works.
Jim, you were on all those emails, so you could have hopped on that at any point.
I sort of wanted. I really wanted to see how many I could get myself.
Well, you didn't get that one. So
I felt very.
So who should have won in this category?
You know, I almost want to punt. I have more should-haves because I think there are people that I like better.
But you're an Oscar voter in 1942, and you've got to pick one. So pick one.
I mean, I like Walter Houston. He's a lovely guy.
When I said I had two in this category in my top five, Walter Houston is the other. So
good. Okay.
Because I watched Johnny Eager just like a week or so ago. So I had Walter Houston in this slot when I prepared the script. And then I saw Johnny Eager, and I was like, okay, I have to give him credit for that performance.
I feel better now because you guys were so Van Heflin that A, I'm going to have to go and watch it, but B, I can only half-heartedly give Walter Houston now.
I mean, I really like Walter Houston. I think he's my fourth place. I think I had Van Heflin in third and Walter Houston in fourth. And then we move on to should have been nominated. All right, and Jim, you've got a bunch apparently, but you're going to give me your favorite. Who should have been nominated in this category?
I have to tell you, I would have liked to have seen just about anybody from 49th Parallel. Every single character that you meet in that movie, from Laurence Olivier to Vogel, the German seaman.
If anybody, would be Vogel, I think.
I thought his performance was lovely.
Vogel is great.
Neil McGuinness.
Niall, and I could give you that one. He's great. George, who should have been nominated?
Charles Coburn for In This Our Life. I'd actually redo the whole category other than Van Heflin.
I like Walter Houston. I'm not down with Charles Coburn. I think he overdoes it a little bit. He would win the Oscar the following year, I think, for The More the Merrier. I think he stands out as being a little over the top in that movie. I know it's come up a couple times in This Our Life because of John Huston and other things, but I think it's a very bad movie to me. I did not enjoy this movie. A lot of people over the top, except maybe Olivia de Havilland. And I mean, Bette Davis is so over the top in a good way. Charles Coburn, not so much to me. George and I will have to be at odds on Charles Coburn. Maybe we'll be at odds on my choice as well for should have been nominated, because I sort of have an out-of-the-box choice. An actor that's maybe best known for a film from the 60s, from 50 years ago, called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I have Cecil Calloway from I Married a Witch, who steals all his scenes in this movie in a role akin to Agnes Moorehead in Bewitched. His classical training serves him well in a role that he takes on full throttle. He brings a sophistication to the movie and helps to elevate it to a new level. It's a surprisingly fun movie. This movie I did not expect to like, and it's a tour de force comic performance. The performance stood out in my mind in a big way. And I enjoyed the movie, but mainly because of once Cecil Calloway came in there, it was pretty apparent. I loved him in this. Jim, I don't suppose you've seen it.
No.
George?
I really enjoy the movie, and I have no argument with what you're saying. He's delightful. The movie, by the way, is what inspired Bewitched.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Like I didn't look it up, but I had a feeling.
It's a delightful performance.
Only one minor disagreement so far, so we're rolling right along. And that brings us to supporting actress. Here are the nominees. I actually have 3 of the 5 nominees here in my top 5, but one of them is not the winner. The winner was Teresa Wright for Mrs. Miniver, who, by the way, is one of my all-time favorite actresses. Top 5, top 10, like I love Teresa Wright. But I think her victory is more about what was an overall good year, because she was also nominated in the lead actress category. It was not necessarily about this individual performance. I think there's some better performances here. She's good, but I mean, I feel like there's some really great performances that are in this category and a couple more that could have been in this category, which leads me to the should win based on the nominees. George, who do you have should win out of these nominees?
They're all wonderful. There's no doubt in my mind that that one should have gone to Agnes Moorehead.
Interesting. Agnes Moorehead is not one of the ones that made my top 5. I liked Agnes Moorehead. When I watched Magnificent Ambersons, it was actually at CMS. The audience responded very negatively to Agnes Moorehead. She was good. I appreciated what she was doing. Her over-the-topness was very purposeful in sort of playing this hysterical character.
Yeah.
I get it.
You know, she is over the top. She's an attitude. She drives you crazy in a very realistic way. And you want to take care of her in that same very realistic way.
And I had her on the list. I had her in my top 5 for a really long time. And just some of the movies I watched more recently knocked her off.
As I said, I think that's a good list of 5 actresses. So
the ones I don't have on there are Teresa Wright and Agnes Moorehead, and I like them both. Jim, who should have won?
I think I might have fallen in love with Teresa Wright over watching all of these movies.
All-time favorite for me, but you think she deserved to win, huh?
You see her arc, and she shows her arc and why she loves Vin and how she's changing him. I really enjoyed that arc of her going through that. I think she deserved it. I
don't know if you know me well enough, but I love Teresa Wright.
She received Oscar nominations for the first 3 movies she ever made.
Yeah, Teresa Wright is a special talent, but not in this category anyway. Who I have as should have won is, I actually went back and forth in this one because up until this morning I actually switched it out. But I actually have Gladys Cooper from Now Voyager winning here. Now Voyager is just another lame melodrama without Gladys Cooper. That and the score. I think Cooper firmly commits to the belief system of her character that justifies her seemingly vicious behavior. More impressive, however, is how that character's hardened heart slowly starts to melt, but not in a typical 40s kind of way that all of a sudden night and day. It's subtle and believable and wonderfully executed by this veteran actress. I have Gladys Cooper here. George, it sounds like you liked all these nominees, so I'm going to see if Jim feels strongly about this.
Of the actresses that are on there, I don't think there's one that doesn't deserve to be on that list.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the only reason I feel like Teresa Wright and Agnes Moorehead aren't on the list is because I have 2 other performances, one of which I'll get to, that I liked a lot more. And, you know, that is what it is. But look, for me to have 3 of the 5 nominees in a category that's the most ever. I've never had more than that. That's an impressive tally for this category to get that much right. Do you want to say about Gladys Cooper, George, before I move on?
Well, you know, she played a variation of that mother from hell in many things, but it never came off as the same performance because, as you say, she so invests in the specifics of what she's dealing with. She's excellent.
You ready, Jim, for you should have been nominated?
Dolores Costello.
Dolores Costello in Magnificent Ambersons is your choice for should have been nominated.
Yes, I would have taken Dolores Costello over Agnes Moorehead.
Oh, that's a bold statement there. George, how do you respond to that?
It's different strokes, different folks.
Oh, come on. We need a little more vim and vigor in these fights, guys. Come on.
Like, you know, she's wonderful in the movie. He's right. I know what you mean. It wouldn't have occurred to me to put her on that list because, as I said, I like all 5 of them very much. As much as I like Agnes Moorehead in it, I can understand someone actually just saying, whoa, tone it down.
I was defending her at the CMS that we had with her.
Yeah.
I was very much into her performance, and it was up there for a while. But the more movies I saw, you know, the more those bold choices, you know, seemed a little riskier, and so I didn't go there. I feel like Dolores Costello was not a standout at all, and I also feel like Anne Baxter's role was way too small. George should have been nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
This is weird, honestly, because as I said, I really like all 5 of them. So I was just kind of, who would I do it? Who would I do it with? And I'm picking someone who's very much worked all the time in this era, but is not an award winner, never was, and probably never would have been. But she had 2 really likable performances this year, so she'll be my also ran. Anne Sheridan
I have Ann Sheridan on my top 5. If we're talking about Ann Sheridan and King's Row, I have Ann Sheridan in my top 5.
Okay, good. Well, I think she really elevates King's Row.
I think that she injects some life into it when she shows up as an adult character. Yeah,
she really elevates the film. She's by far the best of the 4 leads. She has a big impact on Ronald Reagan, who's a lot better once he's playing with her.
Agree with
and she's also really, I'm sorry you didn't get to see it, she's a hell of a lot of fun in The Man Who Came to Dinner.
Oh, well, yeah, I forgot she was in that. But Jim, have you seen King's Row?
I did not see King's Row.
Okay. So, George, I think it's a good choice. I like mine a little better. In fact, this is my number 1 Best Supporting Actress choice. I have this next performance over all these, including Gladys Cooper. And actually, this was the first 1942 movie I saw this year because it screened at the TCM Fest. And you'll notice this theme, by the way, of these lighter movies that I'm awarding this year. This movie screened at TCM Fest, and this actress's performance remained emblazoned on my mind throughout the rest of this project. Like the first skier down the mountain at the Olympics whose time no one can catch. She is an award winner, but not for this movie. Mary Astor did not do very many comedies in her career, which is a shame because she is delightful and smart and sassy and charming and fun and witty in The Palm Beach Story. Perhaps the best adjective I could use is self-aware, which feels like a very specific actor choice in this movie that makes this character far more three-dimensional and far more entertaining than she had any right to be, even in one of Preston Sturges' sillier efforts. Like Cecil Calloway, the depth of reality she brings to this character, even in a comedy, makes the laughs funnier, the moments more meaningful, and the whole thing a hell of a lot more fun. I've got Mary Astor in The Palm Beach Story.
She's delightful, and I think she is the best of the leads in that movie.
I did see Palm Beach Story. I can actually see this. She was great.
Okay.
Yes.
Bringing on Best Actress. Boom. Some of the all-time greats here. On my top 5, I have 2.5 of these actresses on my top 5. And the half is because I have the right actress, but for a different movie. I mean, you might guess what that's all about. The winner is that actress, who I feel like was nominated for the wrong movie. Greer Garson won for Mrs. Miniver, famously gave a super long speech. People call it the longest speech of all time. That's sort of exaggerated. Obviously, I feel like this isn't even her best performance of the year. We'll see if these guys agree or disagree. Jim, who should have won out of these nominees?
In that list, I gotta get Katharine Hepburn.
Katharine Hepburn is one of the 2.5 that I have. She's definitely a top 5 for me, so can't disagree with that. George, what do you got?
I think Greer Garson deservedly won the award.
Look, I love Greer Garson. She's a probably all-time, maybe top 15 favorite actresses. Love most of her performances, and she's good in Mrs. Miniver. She's fine. I actually think she's just that much better in Random Harvest myself.
Yeah, she's great in both. I often think that when an actor is great in 2 movies in 1 year, it sways.
That's very possible, but I thought she was better in.
Yeah, I can see. I can't argue with you, but I really felt she had to carry Mrs. Miniver, and the movie could have gone over into.
I feel like Mrs. Miniver is enough of a group piece. I don't think that she had to carry it at all. Like, I think she brings all the charisma and charm that she brings to all her roles, and she was fine. But I actually think that there wasn't as much to it. I think there was more for her to do and bite on performance-wise in Random Harvest. And one thing I'll say about Random Harvest is it packs the biggest surprise of any movie I've seen in a long time. There's a twist that happens that I did not see coming, and I did not think a movie from 1942 could surprise me. She's a big part of that, and she's good in both, but I think degree of difficulty, Random Harvest is the more challenging role, and she knocks them both out of the park, but for me, Random Harvest is the one.
You mentioned that these are people who are at the top of the lists of legends.
Greer Garson and Teresa Wright, and some others that I'm going to mention are like all-time favorites. Katharine Hepburn, huge favorites, and for a long time. So it was great to see them all in a year. Jim, yeah. I'm curious what you think about my Random Harvest comment.
I can actually agree with you. Yeah, she's great in Random Harvest. I think that you're right. I think the degree of difficulty is a little bit more in Random Harvest. I also think that Mrs. Miniver being the film that it is in the year that it was released, there's no way that she would have gotten the nomination for Random Harvest over Mrs. Miniver.
For sure. But I mean, that's the whole point of looking back and sort of reevaluating these things. That's the fun of what we do. But yeah, so at least we're in agreement there. So I think you guys have probably guessed who I would pick based on my previous conversations, Jim.
Anime Wong in Bombs Over Burma.
Did you watch Bombs Over Burma? Because I did.
Oh my god. Oh.
I got no problem with Anime Wong. I mean, she's lovely, but no, that's not who I chose. And this is should win, by the way. This is not should have been nominated.
Teresa Wright.
Yeah, Teresa Wright. To me, she's my second favorite leading performance of the year and an all-time favorite actress. And this is the movie where I first fell in love with her, Jim. Almost the opposite of you. You saying Mrs. Miniver. I saying I first fell in love with her for Pride and the Yankees. The moment she arrives on screen, the film takes off to a new stratosphere. We realize the film isn't a biopic, it's a love story, and a good one. And the moment she asks, when is Lou going to die, is one of the most unusual, inspired, and powerful choices any actor made all year. She has a number of great moments, but I mean, and most of them are light and fun and romantic. She brings the goods as well in the gravitas moment. Mm-hmm. Her screen presence and charm have no bounds. Like I said, it's still only my second favorite performance of the year because this year is full of my favorite actresses of all time. I think she's amazing and deserved it for this film and not supporting for Mrs. Miniver. She's my leading actress of the year.
I wouldn't give her the award for it myself, and I didn't, obviously.
That's as nasty as George is going to get with me.
Look, I think Teresa Wright was great in Pride of the Yankees too. I think my split between them was that Teresa Wright in Mrs. Miniver, I think that the whole arc is the audience needs to fall in love with her. If you don't feel the loss at the end of that film as acutely as everybody else in that chapel, then you are not human.
Well, it's funny because the gut punch to me is the loss of Henry Travers because it's sort of only discussed. You don't see it. That's the moment that has the big punch to me.
That's a real look at that whole stiff upper lip thing and the pain that's behind it. Jim, you're right. You're not really going to feel the pain behind it if you don't fall in love with her first.
Yeah. Look, I fall in love with her all the time. I don't disagree with that.
She really does what needs to be done.
But in both movies, and I think she's more valuable to Pride of the Yankees than she is to Mrs. Miniver. Because I think you need to fall in love with her in Pride of the Yankees as well. Because I think Gary Cooper stinks. I think Gary Cooper's bad, and we'll get to that category momentarily.
As a player, she's more useful in Pride of the Yankees, but I think that's due to the part. I mean, I think she's great in Pride of the Yankees.
But at the same time, another actress in that part is not as charming, doesn't play off Cooper's shitty acting as well. The charm and charisma of her go a long way. Like the moment she says Tanglefoot on screen, like that could come off as mean, and she nails it. So, and there's a range here too, because what about that moment when she says, when is Lou going to die? I mean, like, because no one's telling her. She's reading between the lines, I mean to say. It's resignation in this choice that I did not expect. And it's powerful. It's, again, ahead of its time, I think.
I absolutely agree with you. Look, I want to take nothing away from her performance in Pride of the Yankees. It was superb. I think that her role in Mrs. Miniver was magic. And that was the difference for me.
I would say the same thing about Pride of the Yankees. It sounds like we like a lot of stuff in 1942. So that's good. All right, should have been nominated in this category and was not. George, you get to go first.
Call me crazy. I mean, granted, she won just the year before, but Ginger Rogers, the major and the minor.
She won 2 years before. And George, we are in agreement. In fact, on a previous show, episode 29.4, I said that this was the performance that was the greatest one ever that was not nominated. Ginger Rogers in The Major and the Minor.
That's perfection.
It's a tour de force.
Yeah.
Admittedly, she is my favorite actress of all time. But
I did not know that.
This is the best performance of her career, I think. And she won 2 years before for Kitty Foyle. The year before was Joan Fontaine for Suspicion. Obviously, there's the main premise, which asks her to fairly convincingly play a 12-year-old version of herself. But
and she does it.
And she does it. And if that wasn't enough, she also plays her mother. And in an epically funny scene on a switchboard, she imitates also a junior cadet and her snobby adversary in the film. Her comic timing and sex appeal are unparalleled. It's exquisitely detailed acting that elevates Billy Wilder's debut to unexpected heights.
To
George?
go from that, convincing 12-year-old to just her sassy flirtation. I mean, she pulls off so much in that with no seeming effort. The way her look changes, the way look on her face changes, the way she gradually falls in love. It's a wonderful performance.
I think it's one of the best comic performances of all time,
Yeah.
and it's a shame it wasn't nominated. It is a tour de force.
She should have been.
We actually studied it in college. That's how amazing it is.
I studied political science.
I watched Ginger Rogers movies. We have an agreement there. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Jim, do you want to disagree with this?
No, not at all. You guys are spot on.
Okay.
But I will choose somebody different.
Great.
I'm going to go Carol Lombard for To Be or Not to Be.
No argument for me. She didn't make my top 5. I think it's a great performance.
It was the ability to play. I'm a flirt, but not a cheater. I still love my husband. I got all that. But then it's the quick thinking scenes when she's being interrogated, where she has to think on her own, and you see beat by beat her breaking it down and turning the situation to her advantage.
There are certain movies on this list that I've loved through the years, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
So no argument at all. She's wonderful.
She's wonderful. Like I said, she wouldn't make my top 5 list, but it's a great performance, and sadly, it would have been a posthumous nomination. All right, we're going to move on to Best Actor, I think, guys. And I imagine some disagreement here because I only have one of the 5 nominees on my list. The winner would be James Cagney for Yankee Doodle Dandy, and he is the one that I had on my list, so I think they got this one right. For me, Jimmy Cagney, this performance gives you everything. Comedy, drama, song, dance, romance, plus aging 50 years in a convincing way. Not to mention his extremely charismatic screen presence. Cagney, I feel like, was always slightly ahead of the curve from an acting point of view, but frequently he got buried in these gangster roles. Here he gets to showcase his full range of gifts. Granted, his list of Cagneyisms are on full display, but they seem to fit this role more than any other in his career. It was hard to tell where Cohan begins and Cagney ends. He dove headfirst into this role, and the results, I feel like, are extremely entertaining. So, guys, I have Cagney. George, who do you think should have won?
I think he should have won as well. He's just ebullient. And I think he really does make that movie. It's a delight watching him dance with his, pugnacious boxer. I mean, the moves are hardly different than his fight stance, but yet they're completely different at the same time.
We like watching you dance too, George, in your
You
room.
don't. If there were theater police, you never would have met me because I would have been arrested a long time ago.
All right, Jim, who should have won out of these nominees?
Yeah, we're all in agreement here. I mean, it's the great.
Clean sweep.
The great thing about watching James Cagney in that role is to see his joy at performing this role.
Yeah, I love George's word, ebullient. I think that's a great word.
Yeah.
Cool. That'll segue us right to should have been nominated. And as much as I love James Cagney, he's not my favorite performance in his category. I think I have him second, and you'll see who's first and second. But Jim, who should have been nominated that was not?
I actually had a hard time with this particular one, and it's not because there were too many to pick from. I agree with you. I think Gary Cooper should have never gotten the nomination. I did not like him in Pride of the Yankees, but I really did like Joel McCrea in Sullivan's Travels.
Okay. Joel McCrea's skill as an actor is hotly debated in academic circles, and I sort of land in the middle.
I think he was right for that role. That just happened to line up for him.
Preston Sturgis's widow claimed that Preston Sturgis basically gave everybody line readings.
Yeah.
And Joel McCrea loved that.
Yeah. Because Joel McCrea wasn't a real actor. He was like a Western star that Preston Sturgis found easy to mold.
So he was really comfortable with that, and he was he was comfortable, but he was doing it. I certainly agree with you. He gives a very effective performance in Sullivan's Travels. Yeah,
I think effective is a good word. I mean, outstanding is where I think it falls short of outstanding for me. But I'm not disputing you greatly. I think if I saw it on this list, I wouldn't be disgusted the way I am with Gary Cooper's nomination. And in fairness to the Academy, Gary Cooper was the reigning Best Actor winner at the time. So he was sort of at the top of his career. So George, you should have been nominated.
Spencer Tracy
in Woman of the Year.
Oh, definitely not Tortilla Flat. Woman of the Year.
Spencer Tracy is my third. He's on my top 5. He is Woman of the Year is my third favorite performance of the year. I completely agree. He's terrific.
I always love him, but one thing I love about him in Woman of the Year is how funny he is.
But being very real.
The way he just lets himself respond and lets you watch him respond in Woman of the Year is perfect.
Yeah.
Whatever else you think about them individually, their screen chemistry was.
Oh, in that movie, like top 3 screen chemistry all time.
It's
That To Have and Have Not and The English Patient, like, I think are the best screen chemistry films ever, without a doubt. But even aside from that, he's so real. It's a comedy, but he's very grounded. Yeah, he's on my list. But my number 1 also comes from a comedy. And it's another actor who spent most of his career in gangsters roles, but never won an Oscar, unlike Jimmy Cagney. I have the classically trained Edward G. Robinson in a film called Larceny, Inc., which was the movie that was the biggest surprise of the project for me, and it's largely due to Robinson's balls-to-the-wall, elegant performance. Robinson takes the classic con artist shyster role and adds so much intelligence, grace, and comic timing. I chose him as my favorite performance of the year because in an industry where you're almost assigned roles in the studio system, no actor elevated the material more than Robinson did for the wonderfully fun, huge surprise that was Larceny, Inc. I heard some applause. I don't know who it was.
Me. Yeah.
George, sounds like you're a fan.
Yeah. I mentioned before that there were like 3 actors I wanted to add to the best supporting actor list. He was one. I loved him in Tales of Manhattan. I also love him in Larceny, Inc. He's wonderful. It is one of Oscar's biggest blemishes that he never received an Academy Award nomination. I can get how people don't win, but
I mean, Double Indemnity, supporting Double Indemnity, that should have been like a home run.
He's just terrific. And Larceny, Inc. is so much fun. It's
like, it was like the movie, like it was just one of the, like, it was no nominations. It was like, it also ran, it came in Netflix, I threw it in, didn't expect much, and it blew my mind. Like, it was, I mean, I know that I'm responding to comedies more this year for some reason, but it was so sharp. I mean,
like, need comedy more this year.
The reason and Broderick Crawford is pretty good in it too. It's just amazing.
Yes, he is.
Larceny, Inc. is, you know, I don't want to bury the lead, but it's a top 5 movie for me in this year. Like, I would have nominated for Best Picture. It was that good for me.
It's a very, very good movie.
Jim, have you seen Larceny, Inc.?
I did not see Larceny, Inc. I feel like I ended up seeing a lot of the bottom of the barrel pictures. Bombs Over Burma.
Because it was free on Amazon. That's why you watched Bombs Over Burma.
I was going down the list and I was like, oh, I'll just watch this. And I was actually appalled.
Well, in fairness, Bombs Over Burma, it was like almost outside the studio system. So it almost had the technical capability of a 30s movie. It's almost unfair to compare.
And it felt like it.
I do think Bombs Over Burma is important. I think it's important to have a movie that early that have an Asian American lead.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I really wanted to watch it.
Best directing, home stretch. Some of my all-time favorite directors did movies this year. None of the 5 nominees make my top 5 list, even though Michael Curtiz, William Wyler, and Mervyn LeRoy are all amongst the all-time favorites. Sam Wood is among my all-time least favorites. The winner was William Wyler, one of my all-time favorite directors. Other all-timer favorites of mine did better work this year, I think. Mrs. Miniver is important for propaganda reasons, but I've seen much better films this year, and obviously it won awards because it was important. It was so important, by the way, that there's a script running around town right now called Wyler about how he tried to shape Mrs. Miniver into being more of a pro-war film. Because the famous scene with the German, they initially like start to understand each other more in the book. It's not as confrontational, and Wyler was really pushing for more badder Germans is what he was pushing for. And that's just one example of many ways in which Wyler tried to push Mrs. Miniver in the direction of propaganda. That's its importance culturally. It's a good film. I don't know if it's as good a film as many of the others I saw this year, and we'll get to that. So Best Director, out of this list, Jim, who should have won?
Out of that list, I liked Wyler. I think Random Harvest would probably be my number 2. And I would throw Wake Island the hell out of that category altogether.
Okay, interesting. So you've got Wyler. Anything you want to say about Wyler, about what he brought to the table, or?
What impresses me is how you do these stories when you don't have the budget for extended air shots. I love the setup when Vin is like, this is how you'll know me. I'm going to do this. And then it cuts to it going overhead and they talk about, oh, it's an engine down. No, it's Vin. And then there's one single stock footage shot of planes going. You get the whole story in a really neat package that has almost no visual components at all. It's a really nice storytelling moment. And you can really see the moment with Greer Garson when she recognizes what's
Twin.
going on.
Great use of sound design for sure.
It's these small directorial touches of his ability to tell this story, to take these smaller characters and give them those arcs.
He's a master storyteller, to be sure. And I think the bomb shelter scene is where he shows off his skill best to me.
The crowd scene at the end for the rose judging, holding on Mrs. Belden, just to see like the tear in her eye when she announces.
That's Lady Belden to you, Jim.
I'm sorry, Lady Belden, you're right.
I have films that I liked, direction I like better. I mean, William Wyler, I mean, you have to see Best Years of Our Lives if you have not. I mean, talk about tour de force storytelling. George, who should have won? Are you with him and Wyler?
Yeah, I definitely would give it to William Wyler out of this group. I think that while we did see a lot of propaganda in a lot of other films, this one is never really hitting you over the head. It really is about small moments that add up to make you feel the overall message.
Except he was trying to hit you over the head. Case in point, the priest's speech at the end, which he and this actor Henry Will Coxon rewrote to get more. It
doesn't feel forced.
I disagree.
It's not my favorite movie of the year. He wouldn't be my #1 director of the year, but of the people nominated, his artistry is on hand all throughout this film, and it all adds up.
I think William Wyler is one of the best storytellers ever. There's no doubt in my mind, but not for this movie for me. But Jim, I'm sorry, I'm going to completely disagree with you. We're going to have our first big fight. Out of this 5, I've got Jon Favreau for Wake Island.
No!
As my choice here for the best director of the year. I mean, I think I didn't think much of Jon Favreau before this film, and I want to thank George for loaning it to me. He's not on my top 5, Jon Favreau. I have it number 6 for Wake Island. But I mean, I thought Wake Island was a real achievement. I mean, I think the main achievement in the film is the editing. I have it named as the best editing of the year. But Favreau did a great job, I think, staging some of the most realistic and devastating battle scenes I've seen.
Doesn't it have a great "You Are There" feel? That's what I think made it.
Absolutely. I've seen some other Favreau films, and I rolled my eyes at them most of the time. But this one, I was surprised that it had as much to it. From many points of view, this film is way ahead of its time. Bonus points for recreating very recent history. The film was released 10 months or so after the actual battle. Yeah. And I mean, the battle scenes were extraordinary. And yeah, George, to your point, you're there. He puts you in there almost in a Spielbergian kind of way. Out of these nominees, it's the best directorial achievement. The film is not a top 10 for me. When you're looking at actual film direction, he brought a lot to the table here. He accomplished a lot in Wake Island. And out of these nominees, I think he's my man.
From the beginning, I just felt so jingoistic. My problem is knowing a little bit too much, I think, on the other end of it. This is not the way it went down. Of the 400 people in the Battle of Wake Island, about 50 or 60 died. Americans. That's it.
But that's irrelevant as far as the movie's concerned, I think.
It didn't flow for me in storytelling terms. Everything felt rushed. These are cowboy characters. These are American archetypes. We have to, we're going to watch them be heroes. And I never really felt that I was being given a 3-dimensional character at any moment.
I disagree with that too. I think William Bendix was still learning his craft because I think he gives better performances later in his career. But I have an issue with the performance, but I actually think I appreciate that they made any effort towards character development where Dunkirk did not. I feel like it was the scenes with Robert Preston and William Bendix, they felt like they could, if they were better actors. Robert Preston's fine, but I felt like they felt like naturalistic dialogue. They had a natural, loving rapport, brotherly rapport that I appreciated them taking the time to show us that these were people. And I did think they were more 3-dimensional than a lot of war movies bother to show, especially for a movie that's mostly battle. I appreciated those respites of character development. I mean, the main thing in terms of Favreau's work, a visceral sense of the oncoming fight from all points of view. So, George, you want to break the tie a little bit here?
I don't know what to say. I understand what both of you are saying. I'm on your side. I actually liked the movie. I really did have that visceral sense watching it.
It's time to move on to should have been nominated. And so this is I think what you guys have been looking forward to. So, George, I'm going to let you go first.
Preston Sturges for Sullivan's Travels.
Preston Sturges, Sullivan's Travels. I like Sullivan's Travels-ish. I already mentioned some issues with it. But for me, I feel like it's the direction sometimes that's a weaker link. Aside from a few great moments, Jim talked about some of them.
What about the silent sequence?
that's a little heavy-handed to me.
I think it was beautifully.
I like the scene with the two studio heads. You know, it's all one long shot. You know, it's almost like Preston Sturges letting them be. I like that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of great moments in Sullivan's Travels, but there's a lot of not great moments. Like, for example, the high-speed chase with the trailer and like the very cartoonish chase and stuff. That's sort of thing that really bumps for me in Sullivan's Travels.
But you're told right at the beginning that that's going to happen. I mean, it's like they're sitting watching a film, and this moment that seems false at that moment while they're watching the film then ends up being something that happens. And I think there is such a clear hand guiding Sullivan's Travels that even if there were a moment I were to find,
right,
I agree with you on that there.
I just feel like, look, I mean, I'm the one who agreed with you about the screenplay. I had it as should have been nominated in the screenplay, and it's a very good movie. I appreciate it. I appreciate its importance. It's, you know, I mean, like, in terms of Preston Sturges, I mean, I'm in love with
He's more of a writer than a director.
Yeah, no, for sure. And The Lady Eve, I think is a much stronger film for me. And much stronger directorially as well. But Sullivan's Travels is the one that gets all the attention, and it's super important. Like, I get it, and like what it's trying to say, like it's really has got a lot to offer. But in terms of some of the big time directorial efforts that I saw this year, you know, there's a lot of people I would put in front of him.
Preston Sturges was one of the shortlist ones for me.
Okay.
But I you know, the one that I ended up going with was a film that I've talked about it, but I didn't like it as much as I liked the directing, which was Magnificent Ambersons. It felt to me the most modern of all the films in the way that he pulled it from the very opening sequence. I think the directing is the strongest part of that, and it kept me coming back and engaged. And the story was what kept pushing me away.
Well, I mean, that's the book too, but it's very metaphorical. There's a lot going on in Magnificent Ambersons. I agree with you. He's my choice as well. I had Orson Welles, and I went back and forth on this. I initially had Michael Powell for 49th Parallel, who is like one of my all-time favorite directors. That was literally one of the other last-minute changes, him and Gladys Cooper. I switched back to Welles, because I actually think 49th Parallel is a better movie than Magnificent Ambersons, but the latter is probably advanced the art form more.
Completely agree.
I don't want to say too much about it because it is going to be the third or fourth classic we do this year. Definitely, for me, Orson Welles was the best director of the year, and Michael Powell was second for me.
The work that we see that he did on the movie is extraordinary.
Moving on, Best Picture, 10 nominees. Out of these 10 nominees, I have 3 in my top 10. 2 movies from 1942 are in my top 100 films of all time. One of those top 100 movies for me is a Best Picture nominee this year, and we'll get to that momentarily. The winner, of course, was Mrs. Miniver in a pretty much a sweep. We've been talking about that all night. I wonder what you guys are going to say for what should have won Best Picture out of these nominees. George, you're first.
49th Parallel.
That's my 4th favorite film of the year, so I'm going to have a hard time disagreeing. You know, a sentence or two to explain yourself?
For one thing, the location photography really distinguished it from the American films we were watching, where the sense of place, even in the one that won, actually got lost. The people we met all seemed like, they seemed less like archetypes, more like real people confronting this encroaching world situation. It's visually stunning. You know, real people, little people had to rise up and face this and fight it themselves, is so beautifully put across. It has simultaneously an epic sweep and a small true to life feel at the same time.
Very personal, yeah. And, you know, in direct comparison to Mrs. Miniver, I would say 49th Parallel is also propaganda. It was actually financed by the War Commission, and yet it feels like so much less like propaganda. Especially because some of the Germans are treated as real people. We've already talked about Vogel.
We're watching their story. We're watching them trying to, yeah, that's true.
It's fascinating in that regard. And of course, Michael Powell is a master storyteller, just like William Wyler. But
it certainly is.
I mean, if anything, the only thing that makes 49th Parallel 4th and not 1 to me is both of you, I didn't like Leslie Howard. I didn't like Laurence Olivier either. I didn't like Raymond Massey. Like all those stars that were
they got in the way of the film for you.
Got in the way. They're just a little big. Whereas like all the Nazis are really good.
Yeah.
Actors. So Jim, anything on 49th Parallel?
That's my choice. 100%.
Oh.
Not even a question.
Is 49th Pal your number one film in 1942?
No.
Oh, okay. So you've
But
got
on
another
that
one
list,
that on this list. All right. So do you have anything you want to add to what George and I were saying?
I think it is a little bit more archetype. Like, I think those characters are definitely pointed at drawing Canadians into the war by saying, here's the dilettante, here is the shirking army guy, you know, here is the commune, and here's the independent free living spirit. You know, all of us, we are all disparate people in this huge country, but we're all being touched by this, and we all have to draw in.
But I also feel like,
archetype.
as far as archetypes go, they're a little bit off the beaten path. Like this concept of the commune of German people, like that's sort of like an out of the box idea. Like I don't, and the fact that Raymond Massey was a potentially deserting officer or army person, a Canadian army. That's American movie wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? Like that was sort of a bold idea. Just following the Nazis to begin with is a bold idea. I mean, I see your point, but at the same time, there are archetypes with like a twist almost.
Yeah, but they also it seemed to be a lot of people, and the commune accepted, but a lot of people who were disinterested. You know, the whole point is to find the fighting spirit.
In terms of propaganda, like the scene with the two speeches in the commune during the town meeting or town hall meeting, whatever they had there, with Eric Portman and Anton Wolbrook, that far outclasses any scene in Mrs. Miniver that tries to like make the same point. No music. The rainstorm outside is the only soundtrack. I think what makes it good is having Eric Portman state the other point of view. Like obviously it's an evil point of view, but Eric Portman as an actor, and he was a top 5 actor for me, really sold it. Like he bought it. He bought into that and really tried to make the case. And I think that made the scene more believable. I'm glad we all like 49th Parallel. Now it's time for some argument, at least with George, because my number 2 film of 1942 is on my top 100 of all time. And in fact, it is number 100 on my top 100.
I'm getting lost with all these numbers.
Oh, I'm sorry. My 100th favorite film of all time was a Best Picture nominee this year. And it's the one that George doesn't seem to like, or he thinks is overrated. Yankee Doodle Dandy is a film I grew up with, rewatching the film over and over, experiencing it, memorizing it, singing along, rooting for Cohan, and feeling inspired afterwards. It takes great storytelling to evoke that kind of a response, regardless of what age I first experienced it. I think it's a near perfect screenplay covering all the high points in Cohan's life and career without anything feeling wanting. It also amazingly never feels sprawling to me like many biopics can. I feel like it gives you just enough and moves on without sacrificing information or emotion or detail. A shining example of what a biopic can be, as compared to, for example, another biopic of a songwriter from this year, My Gal Sal, which had some good elements, particularly craft elements, but storytelling-wise, it was a mess. So Yankee Doodle Dandy is one of my all-time favorites, and that's where I would have voted in this year's Best Picture race. George, I know you're not a fan.
I don't love the movie. I don't hate it. I do think it recreates the world of vaudeville really well, very appealingly. There's just something about it. It feels kind of hokey.
So, Jim, anything on Yankee Doodle Dandy? You hate it too, right?
No, I'm actually more in your boat.
Come on my boat, Jim. There's plenty of room.
You know, I think the difference is, like you, I grew up with the film and I memorized the songs. When I was in 9th grade, we did the musical George M.
George M, sure.
But it's one of my grandparents' favorite films, so they showed it when I was younger. And I think having that nostalgia definitely makes it more appealing to me.
Well, also as an artist, I feel like it's inspiring. Should have been nominated for Best Picture. So, Jim, you said that 49th Parallel was not your number 1 movie. And we know that Magnificent Ambersons was nominated for Best Picture, so that wouldn't go here. So, Jim, what is your favorite film of the year that should have been nominated?
To Be or Not to Be. George
and I saw it together. That is top 10 for me. I think I have it number 9. I'd like To Be or Not to Be a lot. Have you seen the remake, out of curiosity, with Mel Brooks?
You know, I haven't. I also don't know if it would be as successful.
It's good. And I also, they brought it, they revived it on stage in New York. Maybe in 2008 or 9,
with the late great Jan Maxwell.
Jan Maxwell and David Raish from Sledgehammer.
Yes.
This was actually an incredibly subversive film.
Oh, it certainly is.
And I'm not really even sure if it's a comedy, like I think it uses all of the tropes, like comedy tropes, but I didn't find it a particularly funny film. There are definitely funny characters. Usually in the comedies, you're not really worried about the leads. You're confident that they're going to escape. And I really was not sure of that. And I don't think Lubitsch really shied away. I think he showed as much as he could the devastation of war in that bombed out Warsaw sequence where you see the before and after, and you see somebody get shot on stage when Seletsky gets shot. He holds it and lets him die in front of you. You don't do that in a comedy.
Well, you do when you've got the Lubitsch touch.
You know, I think you could take all the laughs out of it, Jim, and it would still play really well.
100%.
It's a very special movie, and I've watched it many times over the years, and I appreciate it more and more. I appreciate everyone's. Well, you know, to be honest, I don't know that Jack Benny probably would agree he was never the greatest actor in the world, but somehow everybody knew what they were doing. And I mean,
I don't know. I had Jack Benny in my top 5 for this movie. I thought he was great.
It all comes together beautifully, and how he.
But I mean, like, he does a lot in that movie. Like, we talked about Ginger Rogers' work, you know, not too long. Like, he's playing a lot of, you know, he's doing a lot of different stuff, and believably, and like, I think.
Yeah, To Be or Not to Be is just gold.
Yeah,
and I'm with you. I certainly wish it had been a nominated film.
And I do want to point out
out of 10 nominees, I definitely agree with that. If with 10 nominees, I would put it among the top 10 for sure. Jim?
Best Supporting Actor. I was very close to taking Felix Broussard as for Greenberg.
Yeah,
he's great.
For the Shylock speech that they give him.
Yeah,
I thought about him too, but
I did too.
I saw a lot more. He would be top 10 if they had 10 nominees, but I didn't have him on my top 5. George and I watched this in June, so he was an early consideration for that category.
Yeah.
After seeing as much as I did, he sort of got pushed off. But he's very good, and he's in a lot. He's in Tortilla Flat. He's in a ton of stuff. That's the thing about character actors in 1942 is you keep seeing them pop up in everything. So George, 49th Parallel, is that your favorite film of 1942? 49th Parallel?
No.
Okay, so what is your favorite film that should have been nominated for Best Picture? In fairness, ladies and gentlemen, he didn't know this question was coming. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. No. I would say Sullivan's Travels.
Oh. Okay. I don't know why.
I've been pointing towards this all night long. Why are you surprised?
No, you're right. No, I know. We've argued about Sullivan's Travels enough. I mean, it's a good movie. There's no question about that. But I loved so much this year and there's so many bumps that I have with Sullivan's Travels. Like, Sullivan's Travels is interesting for me, and I hope I'm going to say it better than I've said it before. The highs that it has are some of the best of the year that I saw, but the lows or the things that bump for me are real problems for me. So
it doesn't have great actors. That's for sure.
That's part of it. But there's no doubt in my mind it's an extremely important film. And one more point I'd like to say about Preston Sturges is without Preston Sturges demanding to direct movies, there's no Billy Wilder. You know, the concept of the writer-director was non-existent before Preston Sturges started making demands. So what you're getting from his films like The Great McGinty, Lady Eve, and things that led to Sullivan's Travels is a personalized voice, you know, a true auteur in the traditional sense. So I give Sullivan's Travels a lot of credit for that. And it's potentially his most important movie.
I really did like Sullivan's Travels. I'm going to split the difference between you guys because the problems are big problems.
At least I have that, so I feel a little bit better. Not a complete jerk. All right, you guys ready for my favorite?
Yes.
Cool, very cool. Yankee Doodle Dandy is my number 2 movie of the year, but my number 1 movie of the year is a film that's come up already, and it is a top 100 movie for me. It's top 70, I think, and it's elevated given the theme of the evening, I don't think it'll surprise you guys to learn that it was a comedy. Elevated by the aforementioned tour de force performance by the indomitable Ginger Rogers. The Major and the Minor is one of the sharpest and most inventive comedies I've ever seen in my entire life. As only Billy Wilder screenplays can do, it pokes fun at gender politics, sexuality, and generational differences while never slowing down so that you notice it right away. It tackles these issues without forcing them on you. The result is a film that's breezy, fun, witty, intelligent, and one of my all-time favorite movies. Major and the Minor is my favorite movie of 1942. Jim?
I have no bones with that. I think it's interesting that we keep going back to the comedies.
Well, that's what I was saying in the beginning. These are the films that are sticking with me from this year because
Yeah.
the dramas are so melodramatic, but the comedies, they seem to last.
The comedies are more pointed. They dig to deeper, more relevant issues.
I agree with that in this year in particular. And also,
Timeless issues.
my top 10 of 2017 reflects that a little bit to some degree too. George?
I loved The Major and the Minor. I thought it was so sharp, so witty. It was something that I thought of. I thought it had to be an original screenplay, but no, it wasn't.
Well, I mean, I think it was like suggested. I bet you it was
Yeah.
more original than it wasn't. It was suggested by a play was the credit.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I mean, it might not have been my choice, but there is a link to, there is something subversive about all of these films in that time period when everybody was, you must take a stand, you must take a stand. Sullivan's Travels is the exact opposite. Hey, people whose lives are shit need to be entertained.
Yeah.
To be or not to be, people
Your
whose
point, like that point of Sullivan's Travels infected both of our other
yes,
best
yes.
picture winners. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be or not to be is about people whose lives are threatened for their right to that is being threatened.
But they still find the humor. You know, they
yes,
still
yes. And yours, I mean, this is, you know, the hypocrisies that they're subjected to. It's all done with such humor, and she's so playful and funny. But I love the movie. I totally understand why you would put it there. It was definitely a runner-up on my lists for many categories.
I was expecting a lot of grief for this one, so I feel I feel emboldened. I'm excited that we have some agreement here. The question I always ask at the end of the show is, if there was one movie you could remake from 1942, which one would it be? And three that I know that have already been remade include To Be or Not to Be, The Major and the Minor. Interestingly, two of our Best Picture winners or choices. Magnificent Ambersons was remade. So for television, correct. So aside from those, what films from 1942 that you watched would you like to remake? And who do I have going first? Jim.
I would actually like to see Wake Island remade because I didn't like it so much.
I can see that for sure. George.
Maybe King's Row. King's Row was like the first Peyton place, and but it had to rush a lot to fit into its 2-hour time span.
Yeah, it would have been a great TV show. I was thinking that.
And also, what happened to make that butcher? It was Charles Coburn, wasn't it?
It was Charles Coburn, yeah. I'm glad you said King's Row. It's one of the ones that I had listed because I would love to have any other director than Sam Wood take a chomp out of that material. You know, it's highly melodramatic. It's top 15, I think, for me. I think the story is really interesting.
It's good.
I would love to get underneath some of these concepts that were going on that were sort of rushed over. They didn't dig deep enough character-wise. I, for example, could have a lot of fun with that material potentially. I really loved the Falcon series of movies with George Sanders. I would love to bring that character back somehow just for my own giddiness. I think if the movies are fine, I don't need to improve upon them too much. Maybe some better mysteries. Did you see them, George?
I'm really sorry I did not.
Okay. I imagine you did not, Jim, either. They ran on TCM in succession. They played them all like on the same evening. So I just taped them all and watched them all. And they're super fun. He's like a civilian detective that always gets in the way of the police and stuff. They're really fun and sharp and good mysteries. Another thing I'd like to do just for fun is I'd like to do the stage play Larceny Inc. Like if I could find like a cast to get together, I think that'd be like fun to do. It doesn't need to be improved, I don't think. But the one that I would like to modernize is one of the first ones I watched. I actually already started writing an updated screenplay of You Were Never Lovelier. The movie's fine, but it's a little outdated. And I thought the concept might be fun to bring to a modern audiences. So I changed the Fred Astaire character to a female rock and roll, wannabe girl. And the Rita Hayworth is going to be sort of a shy male character, and I'm going to play with it that way. But I would like to do You Were Never Lovelier. That's my goal.
No pun intended, but that is a lovely little movie, and it's a nice idea.
So the next question I have is for the audience. Jim and George might tell me their preferences privately, but I want to give the audience a poll. So obviously 2 years ago in 2015, we looked back 25 years at the films of 1990. Last year, in 2016, we look back 50 years at the films of 1966. And this year, for the 2017 season, we look back at the films of 1942, 75 years. So my question to the audience is, what should we do next? I'm going to give you some choices. We're not going to do 75 years again, which would be 1943, which George has already said and privately that there's no point in doing 43 because Casablanca would be the only film worth discussing. Humphrey here would be winning all sorts of awards. But also we don't want to do consecutive years. But I am willing to go do 25 years again. So here are your options. We can go do 25 years again, which for 2018 would be 1993. So we can do the films of 1993. I'd be willing to do 50 years again. For this year would be the films of 1968. And in theory, we could always do 25, 50, or 75 years, depending on what we've recently done. Or we could also mix it up, and we can go back 30 years and do the films of 1988. Or we can go back 60 years and do the films of 1958, because we've done 60s and 90s and 40s now. We've not done 80s or 50s. So just something to consider. Let us know your choices on Facebook or Twitter or what have you, or in the YouTube comment section, and we'll take a look at what you have to say, and then we'll decide and announce it on a future sound off probably. So guys, I have a few more housekeeping with the audience, but you guys have any closing thoughts about 1942 or the show in general?
Well, this was just a lot of fun talking about a lot of good movies and what we all love about movies and what was true of them in 1942 and what is true of them today. I just had a good time and loved looking over these movies and trying to see them in the context of when they were released, when they were made.
And Jim, anything?
Yeah, no, it really sort of surprised me. I am woefully deficient in classic movies, and being handed a list of movies from 1942 and going through them and sort of taking them one by one, for me, it was as much of an education as it was enjoyable.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And I mean, look, this is a lot of work. I mean, like, I booked these guys in March or April or something, and we've been working all year, sharing movies, sharing lists, and watching these movies. It's a lot of work, and I just want to thank Jim, Carol, and George. I want to thank you for all your dedication, hard work. Any point along the way you guys could have bailed and put me in a real pinch. So I appreciate you guys following through with this and making it happen. Thank you very much
for asking.
So, ladies and gentlemen, our next season starts in April sometime, and we'll keep you posted on Facebook or Twitter. We got to coordinate dates with Davey, but season 4 will start in April. So stay tuned. Look for updates, and we'll give you dates and schedules going forward. I was discussing with Devin the other day that while it was a grind sometimes to watch 177 films from both 2017 and 1942, it was also a great joy to experience the art form I've chosen for a career, both past and present. I learned so much about not just filmmaking, but also about life, love, history, and humanity. In that sense, it was a great privilege to visit all those worlds, real and imagined, old and new, and a particular honor to visit those worlds with great friends and colleagues like Devin and Ryan and Nate and James and Jim and George. So in many ways, ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me that I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth. With that said, good night, everybody. I can now officially declare this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Praise the Lord.